Casualty opened on British television in September 1986, and 3 of the people you're about to meet are gone. One died after a fall down a staircase. Pneumonia took another at 87. The third died in Dublin 3 weeks ago, an Oscar on her shelf. Number 1 on this list is Derek Thompson, and long before he pulled on a nurse's tunic, he had 4 albums out on a major record label. He was 13 years old. His twin sister Elaine sang beside him, and the pair had been performing together since they were 6 at socials and parties and charity concerts around Belfast. A promoter called Phil Raymond spotted them and booked them into the Belfast Opera House. Then a recording manager named Norman Newell flew the twins to London. In 1961, Parlophone released an album under the name Elaine and Derek. 4 albums followed and 15 extended plays, and a part in a film called Gonks Go Beat. By 1967, the 2 of them had folded into a folk trio, Odin's People, with a musician named Larry Johns, and put out 2 more singles. Charlie Fairhead was the charge nurse who absorbed every disaster in the department and never raised his voice. Thompson was 38 when the first episode went out, and he did not leave for another 38 years. 901 episodes. Film work had come first in Yanks in 1979, in Breaking Glass and The Long Good Friday in 1980, and in Wild Geese 2 in 1985. None of that mattered afterwards. To the country, he was the nurse. In July of 2017, when the corporation published what it paid the people on screen, Thompson turned out to be the highest paid actor at the BBC, somewhere between £350,000 and £400,000 for the financial year. That money came out of the license fee, and every newspaper in Britain printed it. A first marriage to a woman named Christine ran from 1967 to 1978. The second one started on his own set. Dee Sadler was an actress who came in to play a character called Maggie in an episode of the second series, and they married in 1989. They have 2 sons, neither of whom has ever been named publicly. For years, the couple kept a home in Bristol, where the programme is made, and a house in Brixton in South London. Thompson announced he was going in May of 2023, and he put it about as plainly as Charlie would have. The time has come for me to hang up Charlie's scrubs. He filmed the last of it that year, and the episode went out on the 16th of March, 2024. Those final hours, he said afterwards, were some of the best episodes of his career. At 78, he is still in Bristol, and the corporation has him booked to walk back through those doors as a guest this year. For 38 years, the man who could never leave that building was played by a Belfast child star who had already lived one entire career before most viewers had heard of him. Second on the list is Cathy Shipton, and she was told she was never going to have a child. She was 44 when her daughter arrived. Tallulah Grace Lilly was born in March of 2001, and Shipton has spoken publicly about the reflexology she credits with helping her get there. The father is the actor Christopher Guard. They met in 1993 on the Casualty set when he came in for a short run as a clinical nurse specialist called Ken Hodges. 33 years later, the 2 of them are still together in West London, and they have never married because she has said openly that the institution does not interest her. Duffy was the nervous student nurse the audience learned the whole department through. Week by week, born Catherine Ellen Shipton on the 27th of March 1957 in Lewisham in South London. She had an Irish mother, an English father, and a Roman Catholic upbringing. A convent school taught her 2 languages and journalism, and a drama teacher there told her she had the makings of an actress. She trained at Rose Bruford College from 1977 to 1980. When the audition came, she went in for the receptionist, Susie Mercier. The producers gave her Duffy instead, and that decision shaped the next 3.5 decades of her life. She was one of only 10 faces in that first episode and one of just 2 who were still turning up decades later. Nobody in the original company came and went as often. She left in 1993 because she wanted to. Back she came as a regular in September of 1998, out again in 2003, in for 2 episodes in 2006 for the 20th anniversary, in again in 2015 for the 30th series, and then back full-time from 2016. Every one of those departures was her own decision, which is rarer in British television than it sounds. Actresses of her generation were usually shown the door rather than choosing it. Shipton kept being asked back and kept saying yes when the story interested her. What the writers did at the end is the part that stings. They gave Duffy vascular dementia. The most competent nurse in the building lost the ability to do the job, and the audience watched it happen slowly over months in a Saturday night slot. Her last scene went out on the 1st of February 2020, 34 years after her first. She moved straight on to Hollyoaks on Channel 4, playing a woman called Lydia Smith because she had no interest whatsoever in stopping. Viewer reaction to that ending was enormous, and she spent weeks afterwards talking publicly about the illness rather than herself. 3.5 decades of viewers felt protective of Duffy. Cathy Shipton is 69, living in West London with the man she met at work, raising the daughter she was told she would never have. Third on this list is Brenda Fricker, and she died on the night of Thursday, the 16th of July this year. Dublin, 81 years old. Her agent, Phil Belfield, released the news the following morning. She had died after a period of ill health, and no cause has been given since. What Belfield added is the part worth keeping. We will never see her like again, and the world is lesser for the lack of her. Ireland's Prime Minister said he was deeply saddened. The Deputy Prime Minister put it like this: as the first Irish woman to win an acting Oscar, she opened doors and set a standard of excellence that continues to inspire generations. Within 4 days, the Lord Mayor of Dublin, Darrell Barron, had opened a book of condolence at the Mansion House, and members of the public came in to sign it between 10 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon. Megan Roach ran that department by force of personality, and she had no patience for anybody's ego. Fricker was born in Dublin on the 17th of February 1945. Her mother, known to everyone as Bina, taught languages at Stratford College, and her father, Desmond Fricker, worked in the Department of Agriculture and doubled as a broadcaster and a newspaper journalist under the name Fred Desmond. What happened inside that childhood she chose to tell the world herself at 79 in a memoir published last year called She Died Young, A Life in Fragments, Tuberculosis, self-harm that started before she was 10, abuse, psychiatric hospitals, over and over again. She was blunt about all of it, and she was blunt about why. I cannot remember not wanting to die, she said. Asked what the inside of it felt like, she answered that you are mentally locked into a place where you are not happy, and that is the sad bit. Writing the book, she told The Guardian, was murder for her. Before any of the acting, there was a desk at the Irish Times, where she was assistant to the art editor and hoped to become a reporter. Acting arrived, by her own account, entirely by chance, and a stage career in London followed. She was 41 when Casualty began, and Megan Roach was the character the first 5 series were built around, 65 episodes. Then, in December of 1990, she walked away from the biggest television part in Britain because she had finished with it. By the time she handed the part back, she was already an Academy Award winner. My Left Foot took her the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress in 1990, the first Irish actress ever to carry one home, and she used the speech to thank Christy Brown for being alive and to honour his mother. Then came Home Alone 2 and The Pigeon Lady in Central Park, and a whole generation of children who had no idea they were watching an Oscar winner feed birds, the field A Time to Kill, Veronica Guerin, Angels in the Outfield, more than 30 films across 6 decades, and a last screen credit in a picture called The Swallow in 2024. Her marriage to the director Barry Davis lasted from 1979 to 1988, and in the memoir, she disclosed that she suffered 6 miscarriages during it. She had no children. By the end of her life, she had very few relatives left at all, which turned out to matter enormously in the week after she died, because the family deliberately delayed her funeral so that one surviving relative living outside Ireland could get home for it. Liz Duffy, the daughter of Fricker's closest friend, explained the arrangements to the Sunday Independent, and they were exactly what you would expect of the woman. The street outside the church could be lined by anybody who wanted to come. Inside would be private, for family and friends, and at Fricker's own request, some of the people from the Liberties, the Dublin neighbourhood she lived in, were to be invited in to sit among them. As this is being written, that service has still not taken place, and nobody outside the family knows yet where she will be laid. Dublin City Council had already voted her the Freedom of the City earlier this year. She never collected it in person. It was confirmed to her posthumously a few weeks after she died, which is the sort of timing she would probably have made a very dry joke about. Megan Roach was the woman the whole department leaned on. Brenda Fricker spent much of her own life on the other side of that arrangement, in hospitals as the patient, and she told the truth about it in print before she went. Duffy or Megan Roach, which of those two nurses did you actually trust with your own family? Put the name in the comments and say why. Fourth is Patrick Robinson, who had a professional football trial on the table and turned it down for more drama lessons. Southampton wanted a look at him. His cousin is Ian Wright, so the talent ran in the family, and everybody around him knew it, and he said no anyway, and went to extra classes instead. He was the 5th of 7 children. His father came from Jamaica and worked as an electrician, and his mother was English-born. Before drama school, he studied a little architecture and worked as a messenger boy for Robert Stigwood's organisation, carrying envelopes around the music business. Then the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art took him, and after that, the Royal Shakespeare Company kept him for 4 seasons, in Stratford-upon-Avon and in London. 4 seasons with that company is a serious apprenticeship, and it is the reason he could hold a scene without ever raising his voice. Ash was the nurse with the shortest fuse in the building, and the strongest sense of what was fair. Robinson arrived in an episode called Penalty on the 7th of September 1990 and left in the series' 10 finale Night Moves on the 24th of February 1996. 6 years of it. He came back for the 2-part finale of Series 12 in 1998, and then again 17 years after first walking out as a consultant in 2013 and 2014. Same building, bigger job, completely different man playing him. The character had been promoted from staff nurse to charge nurse, and finally to consultant, which is one of the few complete career arcs the program has ever handed anybody. Between all of that, he worked constantly. The Bill, Midsummer Murders, Death in Paradise, The Last Kingdom. In 2013, he went on Strictly Come Dancing with the professional dancer Anya Garnis and got all the way to 5th place, missing the final by a hair, which for a man who had turned down a football trial 30 years earlier was a strange second chance at being watched for what his body could do. Millions of people who had never seen an episode of Casualty voted for him every Saturday for 3 months. Ian Wright, meanwhile, had spent his own career being cheered by exactly the same sort of crowd in a completely different building. He is 62 this November, married with 4 children, 3 daughters and a son, and the family live in Stratford-upon-Avon. There is something quietly satisfying in that address. Robinson went to that town in his 20s as a jobbing Shakespearean and simply never left it. Back in 1980, as a teenager, he had co-founded a street hockey team called the Ashmead Cruisers, and the same instinct is visible in every choice he has made since. Build the thing, stay with it. 40 years later, he is still doing both. Ash Ashford was written as the department's fighter. The actor playing him had walked away from the easy fight, taken the harder training, and is still in work 4 decades on. Coming up shortly, a porter from the very first episode who was born under a wartime occupation and died in Bath after a fall. 5th on the list, Robson Green, whose father went down a coal mine every morning and whose mother cleaned houses and worked in a shop. He was born in Hexham in Northumberland on the 18th of December 1964 and grew up in a small pit village called Dudley. His names are pure northeast bookkeeping. Robson came from his father's mother's maiden name and Golightly came from his mother's mother. At 16, he joined the Air Training Corps and lasted a fortnight. Then he went into the drawing office at the Swan Hunter shipyard on the Tyne as a draftsman, and he might well have stayed there for 40 years, except that he had started going to live theatre in Newcastle in the evenings. Nobody in his family had ever done anything of the kind. Jimmy Powell was the porter who cracked a joke through every catastrophe the department could produce. Green was 24 when he walked into Holby in 1989, and he stayed 3 years. It was his first proper television job. His own verdict on it, delivered years later to The Independent, is one of the funnier things any actor has ever said about a break. After 2 episodes, he said he was shocked he ever worked again. He was so bad. The writers eventually sent Jimmy out of the hospital to become a factory driver delivering suits, which is about as unglamorous an exit as British television has ever written. Before that, Jimmy had taken first aid classes and briefly thought about training as a nurse, and it turned out to be the last thing anybody remembered about him. Britain disagreed with his assessment. In 1991, the year before he left Casualty, he took the part of Fusilier Dave Tucker in Soldier Soldier on ITV, and by 1995, he was one of the most recognizable men in the country. Then came the thing nobody planned. He and his co-star Jerome Flynn sang Unchained Melody in an episode of the show. The audience reaction was so enormous that a record deal followed, and the single they put out as Robson and Jerome went to #1 and stayed there for 7 weeks. It sold more than 1.8 million copies, and it finished the year as the best-selling single in Britain. 2 actors from a military drama had outsold every professional musician in the country. What that did to him, he has since described very openly. The fame brought drink and drugs with it. He ended up in what he has called a very dark place, and he went into therapy to get out again. He has talked about all of it publicly and without a scrap of self-pity, which for a man of his generation and his background is worth noticing. Men raised in pit villages were not brought up to discuss any of that. Nobody made him say a word. His first marriage to an occupational therapist named Alison Ogilvie began in 1991 and ended after 8 years. He married the former model Vanya Seeger in 2001, and their son Taylor had been born the year before. They separated in 2011. Since 2014, he has played Detective Inspector Geordie Keating in Grantchester, which has now run for 10 series with an 11th in development. Before that, there was Touching Evil and Reckless and Wire in the Blood, and alongside the drama, he built an entire second career presenting fishing and travel documentaries, most of them shot within driving distance of where he was born. A miner's son from Dudley now spends his working life on the rivers, the ones his father never had daylight enough to fish. He is 61. Work has never once dried up. The porter who thought about training as a nurse never did anything about it. Robson Green thought about staying in that drawing office, put down the pencil, and ended the decade at #1. 6th is Ian Bleasdale, who was a Lancashire school teacher standing in front of a class when he decided to give it up and act instead. His mother, by his own account, took to her sickbed over the news. He was born in 1950 in Up Holland, near Wigan, and educated at Balshaw's Grammar School in Leyland, and every single thing about that background pointed at a steady job with a pension at the end of it. So he taught, then he stopped teaching. Through the 1980s, he assembled a television career out of the Beiderbecke affair, Brookside, All Creatures Great and Small, and Inspector Morse, none of it starry, all of it solid, character work, week in and week out on other people's programs. Josh Griffiths was the paramedic who talked calmly to the patient while everybody else in the room shouted. Bleasdale first appeared on the 8th of September 1989 as a speaking extra. That is the whole point of the man. Somebody with 2 lines in one episode of a Saturday night drama stayed 18 years and became one of the central figures in it. Josh went out in a series 22 episode called Finding the Words on the 3rd of November 2007, and Bleasdale left because he had decided to leave. Except that he kept coming back. There was a feature-length 30th anniversary episode in August of 2016, and 4 further episodes after it. And then, on the 16th of March 2024, he walked into that department one more time 17 years after going for a single reason. Derek Thompson was leaving and Josh was going to be standing there when Charlie went. If you want to understand what the original Holby meant to the people who worked in it, that is your evidence. He did not need the job. Nothing in his schedule required it of him. Turning up was the entire point. Away from the ambulance bay, he did Celebrity MasterChef in 2009, presented a program called Hospital Heroes, which put him in front of the real ambulance crews he had spent 2 decades impersonating and worked in the Bill, Doctors and Law and Order UK. At 76, he divides his time between Haworth in West Yorkshire, up on the moors, and Bristol, where the department he spent 18 years in was built. His private life has stayed genuinely private, and after a proper search, there is nothing published about a wife or children at all, which in this business counts as an achievement in itself. Josh was written as the man who turns up when he is called. Ian Bleasdale did exactly that in 2024 for a colleague with absolutely nothing in it for himself. 7th, Christopher Rozycki, who was born in occupied Poland in 1943 and died in Bath at 71 after a fall. The date was the 10th of April 2015. It was an accident. There is no illness in this story and no long decline, just a man of 71 still working who fell and did not survive it. He left behind his wife, the actress and agent Joanna Hole, and their 4 children. There was no retirement and no long goodbye, just a date in April and a telephone call to 4 grown children. Kuba was the Polish porter who had plainly seen far worse than anything Holby could put in front of him. Where he is buried has never been published anywhere, and it is worth being honest about that rather than skating past it. The searching was done properly. That record simply does not exist in public. A man who spent 3 decades in British films and British television got no national obituary at all. And the tributes that did appear came from the fan press that had loved him in a porter's uniform. For a man with that filmography, the silence in the record is remarkable, and it is one of the reasons this entry exists at all. He was born Krzysztof Rozycki in a town in central Poland in October of 1943, in the middle of the German occupation, which is a fact worth sitting with for a moment. Poland in 1943 was not a place anybody chose to be born. Britain got him later. His entire professional life was built here, and by 1983, 3 years before Casualty existed, he was in Local Hero, which remains one of the best-loved British films ever made. Truly Madly Deeply followed in 1990. Then came The Saint in 1997. None of that was small work, and none of it belonged to a man you would describe as a bit player. Local hero alone puts him in a film that people still watch every Christmas, and Truly Madly Deeply is one of the most quietly devastating British pictures of its decade. Rozycki was 42 when the first episode went out, and he stayed 3 series until 1989. Cuba was the ballast of that early department, the one whose face told you how serious a night was going to be before a doctor had opened his mouth. And the thing the program never once did was ask him anything. Cuba's history was a shrug and a joke and a mop. 3 series of that, and the audience never learned where the man had come from. The actor's history was a country under occupation, a childhood inside a war, and an emigration that ended in Somerset. Bath is where he spent his last years, a long way in every sense from a Polish town under German administration in the middle of a world war. There had been an earlier marriage to a woman named Maria Feisenes. On the 21st of December 1991, he married Joanna Hole, and they had 4 children together and stayed together for the rest of his life, which turned out to be another 23 years. Joanna Hole worked in the same industry, first as an actress and then as an agent, so she understood exactly the shape of the life he was living. Kuba Tuschinski was the man in the corridor that nobody ever asked about. Christopher Rozycki was born under an occupying army, made a home on the other side of Europe, and there is still no headstone anybody outside his family can point to. 2 names from here, an actor turns down £250,000 and later loses the top of an ear in a hotel corridor. 8th on the roster is Julia Watson, who was written out of Casualty after 1 series and came back 9 years later to a bigger part than the one she had lost. That does not happen. British television very rarely reopens a door it has already closed. In 1987, the program declined to renew 2 of its original 10, and she was one of them, alongside George Harris. No explanation was ever made public, and the pair of them simply were not in the 2nd series. She went away and worked. 1995, Series 9, the door opened again, and Baz was back until 1998, and then once more from 2003 to 2004. Baz was the sharp senior house officer who could not be charmed and had no interest in being liked. Watson was born in Derby on the 13th of September 1953 and read drama and English at Exeter University before turning professional. There was a sitcom, Never the Twain, in 1981, and a drama called Through an Unknown Land in 1986, and a steady stream of British television either side of her Holby years. Steady work, rarely leading, almost never out of employment. The best story in her life is the one she has never made a fuss about. At a dinner party, she met a writer called David Harson. They married at a register office in Fulham in July of 1989, and their daughter Hannah was born the following year. Harson has since become one of the most decorated poets in Britain. His collection Legion won the Forward Prize. Knight was shortlisted for the Costa, the Forward, and the T.S. Eliot Prizes, and it won the Griffin International Poetry Prize. And in 2015, Fire Songs took him the T.S. Eliot Prize outright, a book he said was driven partly by what he called the depredation of the planet. She has spent 37 years married to a man who works in the quietest corner of British literature, while she worked in its loudest. Between them, they have covered both ends of British writing and British performance for close to 4 decades, and neither has ever traded on the other. Baz Samuels was the Doctor whose relationships fell apart on screen at regular intervals. Julia Watson is 72, still acting and still married to the poet she met over dinner in the 1980s. 9th is Clive Mantle, who was offered £250,000 to stay on Casualty and said no, he wanted a wider range of parts. Consider what that number meant in the middle of the 1990s, offered by a license fee broadcaster to an actor at the absolute peak of his popularity on a program pulling 17 million viewers a week. He turned it down and went looking for work. Very few actors in Britain have ever done that and been proved right. Mike Barrett was the 6'5" consultant surgeon who filled a doorway and turned gentle the moment he spoke. Mantle was born in Barnet on the 3rd of June 1957. As a boy, he sang for 4 years with the choir of St John's College in Cambridge, went to Kimbolton School, did 11 National Youth Theatre productions between 1974 and 1978, and then trained at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. He stands 6'5½", and for years he treated that as a problem to be managed rather than an asset to be used. In 1984, he played Lenny in Of Mice and Men, was nominated for an Olivier Award, and took a share of the Best Newcomer honours. He was 27 years old. That is the level he was working at long before anybody put him in Scrubs. Casualty had him for 85 episodes from 1993. He left at the end of Series 11 in 1997, came back briefly the following series, and then carried Mike Barrett across to the spin-off Holby City for 32 episodes between 1999 and 2001. Elsewhere, he was Little John in Robin of Sherwood, a part he has said he enjoyed more than anything else he has ever done on television, which is remarkable given that Casualty reached many times the audience. He was Lord Great John Umber in Game of Thrones. Alien 3 and White Hunter Black Heart are on his film list. On stage, he did A Streetcar Named Desire, educating Rita and the narrator in the Rocky Horror Show, and in 2010, a Tommy Cooper show called Just Like That, for which he learned real conjuring under Jeffrey Durham. He has voiced a character in Thomas and Friends and narrated Andy McNab's thrillers. His cousin was the actor John Hallam. He supports Chelsea. For a man who spent his 20s worrying about his height, he has spent the 40 years since being cast precisely because of it. Then, in the early hours of the 23rd of March 2013, he was staying in a Travelodge in Newcastle while touring in The Lady Killers. At about 4:30 in the morning, there was noise outside his room. Mantle asked the guests responsible to keep it down. He was pinned to the floor, and the top of his right ear was bitten off. The severed piece was recovered, and surgeons at Newcastle's Royal Victoria Infirmary sewed it back on. 2 men were charged with the attack. In June of 2014, both of them were acquitted. He was left with a reconstructed ear and no conviction to show for any of it. Read that back slowly. A man who spent 4 years on television playing the surgeon who repairs people in an emergency department ended up on a trolley inside one at 4:30 in the morning, having his own ear reattached, and nobody was ever convicted of doing it to him. His marriage to Zoe Mantle lasted from 1992 to 2013. He married the actress Carla Mendonca in 2016, and he has 1 child. At 69, he is still working across stage, screen, and audiobooks. Everyone in Holby trusted Mike Barrett with the very worst of it. Clive Mantle walked away from a fortune to stay interested in his own job, and years later paid for 1 night's sleep with part of his ear. If Casualty was part of your Saturday nights, this channel exists for you. Subscribe, and the rest of that decade comes to you. 10th, George Harris, who stopped acting altogether in 2013 and has not appeared on a screen since. That is the fact people find hardest to believe about him because of what he had just finished doing. He was Kingsley Shacklebolt in Harry Potter and The Order of the Phoenix in 2007, and in both parts of The Deathly Hallows in 2010 and 2011. Before all that, he was Captain Simon Katanga in Raiders of the Lost Ark back in 1981, Black Hawk Down, Layer Cake, The Interpreter, Ragtime. A career that size, and most people cannot name him. His final credit of any kind was a Sky One series called Sinbad in 2012, and then he simply stopped. There was no announcement and no farewell interview. Clive King was the senior doctor whose bedside manner was drier than the paperwork he refused to fill in. Harris was born on the 20th of October 1949 on the island of Grenada, which was then still under British rule, and he was partly raised in Barbados, his father's home. Long before Holby, he was singing in the biggest musical in London. He originated the role of Caiaphas in the 1972 West End production of Jesus Christ Superstar, which means the man British viewers met as a weary registrar in 1986 had already sung the house down in the West End at 22 years old. Grenada to the West End in a little over 20 years is a distance most performers never travel. 36, when Casualty started, he was one of the 2 original cast members not brought back for the second series. Over the following 2 decades, he returned to the program in other parts, 16 episodes spread across 1986 to 2004, which is its own quiet answer to being let go the first time. 16 episodes across 18 years is a longer association with the program, in the end, than most of the people who were kept on. He is 76, privately, is the only way he has lived since, and nothing about his marriage or his family has ever been published anywhere. The reference works themselves flag how little is verified beyond his filmography, so nothing further will be claimed about him here. Casualty could not find room for Clive King beyond 1 series. George Harris went on to 2 of the biggest film franchises ever made, and then closed the door on all of it while people were still stopping him in the street. One name still to come belongs to a household in Dublin that produced 4 professional actors under a single roof. 11th on this list is Bernard Gallagher, and he was still working at 83, playing a gardener in Downton Abbey. Bill Moseley, father of Joseph the Footman, keen on his vegetables, on screen from 2010 to 2013. It was the last thing most of the country saw him do, and a whole generation who had never watched a minute of Casualty knew his face from it. Ewart Plymmer was the consultant who fought the hospital administration on behalf of his own nurses week after week. Gallagher was born in Bradford on the 26th of September 1929, the second of 4 children of 2 mill workers called Harry and Ellen. There was no theatre anywhere in that family and no money for one. He went to Sheffield University, then did his national service in the Royal Air Force and turned professional in 1956, 26 years old, and he had already seen more of the world than most of his contemporaries. What followed was one of the more serious stage careers of his generation, The Royal Court, a run at the National Theatre. Edward Bond's Saved, which was among the most fought-over plays of the 1960s and helped end theatre censorship in this country. Joe Orton, The Royal Shakespeare Company, Seasons in the West End. On television, he was the barrister Jonathan Fry in Granada's Crown Court, and over the years he turned up in The Sweeney, The Professionals, Heartbeat, Midsummer Murders and EastEnders. He came to Casualty at 56 with the whole of that behind him, and for 3 series he set the moral temperature of the entire program. Casualty was in genuine danger during those years. The government of the day attacked it, the Royal College of Nursing objected to the way nurses were being shown, and after 8 episodes, the creator, Jeremy Brock, was summoned by corporation management to defend the program. Concessions were made about how much smoking appeared on screen. The storylines about hospital funding and hospital conditions stayed exactly where they were, and Ewart Plymmer was the man delivering them. Sylvia Vickers became his wife in 1971. They had 2 children, Matthew and Zoe, and the 3 of them were with him at the end. That end came in Brighton on the 27th of November 2016. He was 87. A short illness turned into pneumonia, and it took him quickly, and the tributes that followed said almost nothing about ratings or awards. because what colleagues wanted to talk about was how he had treated younger actors. Paternal was the word that kept appearing over and over. The man who spent 3 series playing the consultant who protected his staff had, by that point, spent 40 years doing precisely that in rehearsal rooms. Where he was buried has never been reported. That search was run properly, and no cemetery is named anywhere. A man who worked for 60 years has no marked resting place in the public record. You at Plymouth supplied the department's conscience for 3 series. Bernard Gallagher was a Bradford mill worker's son who did his national service, learned his trade at the Royal Court, and was still being cast at 83. 12th is Sorcha Cusack, and she carries one of the heaviest surnames in Irish acting. Her father was Cyril Cusack. Maureen Cusack, the actress, was her mother. Her elder sister is Sinead Cusack, and her younger sister is Niamh Cusack. And through Sinead's marriage to Jeremy Irons, she is aunt to the actor Max Irons. 4 professional actors in one Dublin household and a further generation after them. Growing up inside that house cannot have been restful. Kate Wilson was the ward's sister who had done the job long enough to be unimpressed by anybody. Cusack was born in Dublin on the 9th of April 1949 and turned professional in 1968. In 1973, she played the title role in the BBC's Jane Eyre at 24, which is about as big a start as British television had to offer anybody. Decades of stage work followed, with the Royal Shakespeare Company, the Abbey Theatre in Dublin, and the National Theatre. On film, she played Brad Pitt's character's mother in Snatch in the year 2000, and there were runs in Coronation Street and Merlin along the way. Work of that range usually belongs to somebody with a far noisier reputation. She joined Casualty in 1994 at 45 and stayed until 1997, her episodes running on into the 1998 broadcasts. The timing is the part nobody mentions. Cyril Cusack died in 1993. She took the busiest television job of her middle years in the middle of burying her father. Publicly, she has never connected the two, and there is no reason she should have to. Married to the actor Nigel Cook, she has 2 children, Liam and Beth. From 2013 to 2022, she played Mrs. McCarthy, the housekeeper and parish secretary in Father Brown, and that decade made her more recognizable in her 60s and 70s than she had ever been before. Millions of people who know that face have no idea she was ever in Holby and no idea whose daughter she is. Kate Wilson held a department together while everyone around her came apart. Sorcha Cusack is 77, and the most watched work of her entire life arrived after she turned 60. 13th and last, Paterson Joseph, the youngest of 5 children of parents from St. Lucia, who is now the Chancellor of a British university. Oxford Brookes announced it in October of 2022 and installed him the following May. A chancellor is the ceremonial head of a university, and the job usually goes to people with titles rather than to working actors. He grew up in Willesden in northwest London and went to Cardinal Hinsley Roman Catholic High School. Studio 68 of Theatre Arts trained him first, then the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art, and in 1990 the Royal Shakespeare Company took him for King Lear and Love's Labour's Lost. He took second prize in the Ian Charleson Awards in 1991. That is a route almost nobody from Willesden was expected to take in the 1980s. Mark Grace was the staff nurse, carrying a wrecked medical career he had no intention of explaining. Joseph arrived in an episode called Give My Love to Esme on the 11th of September 1997 and stayed through 1998. He was 33, 2 series of a Saturday night medical drama, and then 30 years of everything else. Everything the country actually knows him for came afterwards. Alan Johnson in Peep Show from 2003 to 2015. Green Wing, The Leftovers, Timeless, Noughts and Crosses, Vigil, The Beach, Aeon Flux, and Wonka on film. Very few actors of his generation have moved that freely between comedy, science fiction, and heavy drama. And then he wrote a book, The Secret Diaries of Charles Ignatius Sancho. His first novel took the RSL Christopher Bland Prize in 2023. Sancho was the first Black Briton known to have voted in a general election, and Joseph had been carrying him around for years before a publisher would take him on. He researched Sancho, performed him on stage, and kept going through rejection after rejection until the book existed. Mark Grace was a man locked out of the profession he wanted. Paterson Joseph is 62, runs a university on paper, and put a forgotten Georgian Londoner back into the national record. 40 years on, one yellow car pulled out of that car park with a sign in the back window reading, "Just retired."